the Title I Part A overview. I'm Christine Seipel. I'm the State Title I Director. I've been in this role for not quite a year and a half, but almost a year and a half at this point. So doing Title I Part A as the main focus, but also doing Title I Part D, the neglected and delinquent population. There's a small pot of funds that come to the state and working with those students. But today we're going to go over Title I Part A, but just wanted to give you a face real quick so that you know what I look like. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Katie's going to monitor the chat, so any questions that you have, certainly make sure that you put them in there and she'll stop me as we go. So I'm going to turn my camera off and we'll get started with the Title I Part A overview. So just a couple reminders, just as Karen went over in her presentation, we ask that you please mute your microphone. That just kind of keeps down the feedback and just noise in the background. And I will apologize in advance. I do have a black lab cattle dog mix who is typically pretty quiet. But knowing my luck, he may decide that he wants to say hello during the presentation. So I will apologize in advance if that happens. I think with folks working remotely, we can all attest to the fact that we've had some crazy interruptions as we do Microsoft Teams or Zoom calls and all those different things. So the other thing, please turn off your webcam. That just helps with the broadband and any issues that we may have. Like I said, please ask questions. Katie Preston, my colleague, is monitoring those questions as they come in and will certainly interrupt me and we can certainly address whatever comes through, not an issue. And as a reminder, sessions will be recorded. You probably just saw the little disclaimer on the top that they are being recorded and they will be posted after we complete today's trainings. Another reminder about the different resources. We'll talk about some different resources and guidance documents through this presentation. And as Karen said too, all our presentations, we probably will be mentioning some different resources and guidance. Most of those things are on the AOE website. If you go to education.vermont.gov and go to the student support section, in federal programs under ESSA, that consolidated federal programs team has all our documents that we're mentioning throughout the day. So our agenda for this session is we're going to do an overview of Title I Part A. We're going to talk about targeted assistance programs, school-wide programs, as well as the Title I Part A required set-asides. This is an overview of all these different things. Title I in itself could probably be an all-day training and session with all the different requirements, how to spend the different funds and everything. So again, this is just an overview. As we go through, I may reference different resources as well as some presentations that have been done in the past and that are posted. And just like everything else, and I'm sure my colleagues will say it as well, if you have questions after today, feel free to reach out to us. That's what we're here for. We love helping everybody. We love answering questions and being able to assist you through managing these funds. So we'll start with Title I Part A. Again, just an overview of what it is. And again, not trying to get too much into the weeds, but just kind of briefly going over. So Title I Part A, the purpose of it is to provide all children significant opportunity to receive fair, equitable, and high quality education and close those achievement gaps. So again, making sure that students have the resources so they can be successful academically and trying to close in those gaps that for some students may need in order to be successful in their academic careers. We'll talk about some different aspects through the presentation. So that we, again, make sure that we address those and making sure that those students receive all the resources they need to be successful. So some of the allowable activities under Title I Part A, and there's actually a whole documentation on our AOE website that has the allowable activities, and actually every single title has an allowable uses document, which I would encourage everybody to take a look at, and comes in handy as you start creating your grant application and your investments and looking at what is allowable and what is not allowable. Of course, it's may not be an exclusive list. So again, always reach out to us if you come across something that you're not really sure. It's not in the allowable column or the not allowable column. Reach out to us before maybe you submit the actual investment. So allowable activities under Title I Part A, supplemental instruction for eligible learners. So this is where a lot of our LEAs are using interventionists. So they may be a math or reading interventionist, which would include personnel, so that benefits to pay that particular instructor to provide those services. So Karen's going to go over some of those budgetary things and financial things later, but also would include materials, so supplies to actually provide those direct services to the students. So they may also include assessments, so assessing the students to figure out if they are Title I eligible, as well as assessing their progress after receiving their Title I services. You can also use this for technology purposes. So folks may purchase, for example, Dreambox to use that in their math intervention work, and using that software and that technology to be able to help the learners, again, bridge those gaps and making sure that they're meeting the state standards. Let's see, other allowable activities include extended school day or extended year programs, so after school programs, summer programs. I think we also have some folks that call them vacation break programs. So if there's a long extended period where school is out of session, providing tutoring or after school sessions, again, that interventionist work to help make sure those students who may be struggling a little bit have that extra additional help to, again, gain what they need to meet the state standards. Also includes professional learning relating to Title I, so professional development for those particular teachers, folks that are providing those direct Title I services, so that they have those resources and knowledge to be able to provide those services to the students and be effective and efficient. Also includes preschool services. Since the state of Vermont does require for preschool that there's 10 hours per week of instruction, for Title I to be used for funds, it has to be beyond those state required 10 hours. So as you're going through your application and you maybe there is additional services, whether it's additional tutoring or intervention work, or maybe there's supplies or materials that come or that your preschool wants to provide to these preschool students, we're going to ask when we look at the investment, is it really beyond the required 10 hours per week? So it's important that in I know Karen didn't talk about it, but the data inventory and your continuous improvement plan, that it's clear that anything that is related to preschool is beyond that 10 hours per week. Some of you may have seen in your CFP application, folks who had done the application before you in the investment, they're actually making it pretty clear that says it's beyond the 10 hours per week, and that is fine as well. Katie, is there any questions so far?
Nope, you're all set.
Okay, then I'm going to keep on going. Some additional allowable activities, services for students experiencing homelessness. We're going to get in more detail about this later in the presentation, as well as parent and family engagement activities are also allowable. Again, the expenses towards homelessness and parent and family engagement we'll get into more detail here later this morning. Also allowable activities include non-academic services that impact student performance. So things like school climate, behavior, social and emotional health, attendance. This is, I would say, an area where it's developing in the state. As folks have money to spend in Title I, and particularly this year with the carryover, folks, and even maybe related to COVID, folks are looking at ways to be able to help their students and make sure that they have everything they need to be academically successful. So one of the areas is that other LEAs are looking to spend, maybe social emotional related, whether it's counseling services, maybe more interventionists, those type of things. The thing with this particular spending, again, it needs to be beyond, and going back to what Karen talked about, supplemental to what you already have and what is mandated by the state to have, as far as those positions are concerned. So again, another question, as investments like this come in, it's going to be asked, is this really supplemental and beyond what you already are required to have? Which leads me right into the supplement, not supplant requirement for Title I Part A. So supplement, not supplant. There's a lot of information I'm going to give you right now. Don't worry about writing everything down at this moment. As Karen is sending out the PowerPoint presentations, I've also gave her a memo that came out from Jesse Roy last summer about supplement, not supplant, and what does it really mean here in Vermont. This is also an area that our team recognizes we need to provide some more support for the field. So I can't give you an exact date and time, but there will be a future training about supplement, not supplant, because it's something, like Karen said, there's been some changes. It simplified it, but that also made it a little complex too. So we want to make sure that we're supporting the field. So in a future training about supplement, not supplant is coming, hopefully in the near future. But that being said, supplement, not supplant, Part A funds, again, it must be supplemental. So going beyond what you would normally provide and what you would provide with local and state funds. So you can't supplant the funds from available state and local sources in order to provide services to Title I students. Without this requirement, federal dollars could simply just replace state and local funds that would otherwise be made available, and that is not what the intent of these funds are for. So again, the intent of them is to supplement, increase, enhance all the other things that you normally would have with those state and local funds. So a little snippet here is actually out of the non-regulatory guidance, which is also linked and embedded into Karen's presentation. So we're going to give you lots of resources when you have free time, quote unquote. Take a look at that non-regulatory guidance. But like I said, I'm very hopeful, and certainly it's on my to-do list to do a training about supplement, not supplant. But kind of a little bit of a gist of what kind of changed with the reauthorization of ESSA in 2015. Before with Title I Part A, the presumption of supplanting, or it looked like you were possibly supplanting if you were paying for something that was an activity required by federal, state, and local law, an activity that was paid for with state or local funds in the prior year, or the same services for Title I students that state and local funds support for non-Title I students. Those three presumptions are no longer valid. So if you worked in Title I before, or the consolidated federal programs, those three presumptions are gone. So those aren't the rules that you should be following as you think about, am I supplanting or not? So the new rule says that LEAs now have to have what they call a Title I neutral methodology. And the methodology is pretty much stating that the LEA has not reduced the state and local funds made available to a school because it's also receiving Title I Part A funds. So again, you're not replacing your state and local funds with those Title I Part A funds. Again, the methodology piece, take a look at the non-regulatory guidance, take a look at the memo that was written by Jesse last summer. And again, stay tuned for that future training, because again, I could sit here all day talking about the different methodologies. What's important for today is to be aware about the supplement, not supplant requirement, and that your LEA should have a methodology. So if you're brand new into your position, talking with your business office, those LEA stakeholders, your superintendent, finding out if you actually have a methodology would be step one in my recommendation. And if you do have that methodology, taking a look and seeing, does it actually meet the different methodologies that the federal government actually recommends and endorses? And again, if you get to that point and you want to reach out to me and we can go over it, I'm happy to take a look at it and see where you're at individually. Happy to do that. And again, hopefully sometime soon, we will have a future training about that piece. And the other important thing to take away today is the supplement not supplant for Title I Part A is different than the other titles. So as Megan does her presentation on Title II and Katie does hers on Title IV, you should see that there are differences, and trying to keep them separate and having that knowledge is going to be important for you. All right, so that we touched base on supplement not supplant. There are two different programs that you can operate using Title I Part A funds. And it's important to know what particular program that your schools are operating. So they're either going to be a targeted assistance program or a school-wide program. And again, I think it's really important to take a look at your consolidated federal program application to see, do you have all targeted assistance schools? Do you have all school-wide schools, or do you have a combination? I think that is kind of one of the areas that is scary for me when we go to the LA and to do a monitoring, or we're just having conversations and the CFP team leader is not sure, or the principal is not sure, or the actual interventionists are doing the opposite program than what they're actually authorized to do. And that's scary because it can potentially have disallowed costs. So tip number one is making sure that you know what a target assistance program is, what a school-wide program is, and which each of your schools are actually performing as. So a targeted assistance program are schools that are above the district poverty average or have a low income of 35% or greater. This afternoon, Karen's going to go over that targeting ranking section. Probably not as detailed as she probably would like to, but that's kind of where we take a look and figure out which schools are eligible based on usually the free and reduced lunch data. And I know probably folks are probably hearing, well, we're having an issue getting those free and reduced lunch applications and data. We know that's possibly a concern with some of the waivers that have come out of the child nutrition team and what they've received from the Department of Ag. So we are working on that. We are aware of it. There will probably be more information coming, hopefully soon. But typically we use the free and reduced lunch data to figure out, which schools are going to actually receive Title I funds and use that for targeting and ranking. Under the targeted assistance program, only identified students receive services. So we talk about a caseload. We'll talk about that a little bit more in detail here in a few slides. And under targeted assistance, only Title I Part A funds are in that pool. It's really not a pool because it's only one set of funds, but are used to actually pay for those services. And then the second program is a school-wide program. So schools with 40% or greater lower income are eligible for the school-wide program unless the school receives a state waiver. So there are some flexibilities where you can submit a waiver if a particular school is below 40%, but maybe they were school-wide the year before. So you can submit a waiver through the waiver process to our team, and we would consider it. Again, it's an actual process. So it's not merely just submitting in, hey, we want to do the school-wide waiver, and thank you for your consideration. There is a form to fill out. It goes to a committee. That committee reviews what is submitted in that application, as well as the performance of that school in the previous years. That would be something that you would have to do before you submit your grant application. And that is one of the things that Karen keeps an eye on when we open up the grant application in the spring, as far as who has waivers and not. So our committee submits that information to Karen, so she's informed and on track on that. But you don't want to submit your grant application if you have a waiver pending or you want to submit the waiver. It needs to be in there during that first submission of the CFP application. And even if a school is above 40%, the school may choose to be a target assistance program. And this is a good leeway into making sure that all stakeholders are involved. So it's not an individual's choice about whether they want to be target assistance or school-wide. It's really the stakeholders at that particular school. So superintendents, principals, teachers, staff, parents, all those stakeholders really should be making the decision about a school-wide. There's probably, again, a whole day worth of talking about a school-wide program and a school-wide plan. Earlier this spring, I broke down school-wide a little bit more in detail. Certainly encourage you to take a look at that. And hopefully we'll have some additional trainings coming up about what really belongs in a school-wide plan. So for a school-wide plan, funds are used to upgrade the entire educational program, serving all. Again, we'll get into that a little bit more further here in a few minutes. And Title I Part A funds under school-wide can be consolidated with other federal, state, and local funds. And we have another slide about that coming up, and I'm going to give you some particulars about what you need to do to make that happen. If there's no questions, I'm going to go into detail a little bit more about the Targeted Assistance Program.
No questions right now, Christine.
Thanks, Katie. So the Targeted Assistance Program is for those students most at risk to not meet those state standards per the local criteria that is objective, includes multiple measures, and is uniformly applied. So what does that really mean? So you as an LEA and as your schools within your LEA have to come up with a criteria to assess students, to figure out where they lie, so to speak, and which students really need that additional support. So coming up with those measures is at the LEA and school level. It is not by us at the state level and is not directed by the Department of Education. Certainly there's recommendations, but that is not something where you must do certain things. So there is that flexibility to be able to measure your students because you know your students more than we do, and certainly more than the Department of Education. So again, it has to be multiple criterias, multiple measures, and make sure that it's uniformly applied to all students. In a targeted assistance program, automatically students that are eligible for these services are students experiencing homelessness, migrant, and foster care, and served by an institution for neglected or delinquent students. Some of these population have additional funding sources. So the Title I part, again, is that additional piece that can certainly help support them in their academic achievement. In addition to the Targeted Assistance Program, we talk about a Title I caseload. So if you're operating, if you have a school or multiple schools in your LEA that are operating as a Targeted Assistance Program, you're going to have a Title I caseload. And in that, you need to make sure that you're documenting who's actually getting those services. So again, you have your assessment to figure out who needs them. And then once they're actually enrolled in providing those getting those services, excuse me, again, checking their progress. What services are they receiving? Are they receiving math intervention and reading, or just math or reading? So again, keeping track of those and their progress. And then when they actually leave the program, you know, all those different things. It's important, as I said a little while ago, to make sure that you're documenting that, because that's something that the CFP team during a monitoring would ask for. Those that do your single audit for, used to be the A133s, but this is the federal single audit, they could ask for this documentation as well. And what it's used for is to determine that you're actually serving the correct students and the right population. So certainly even in this past year, we saw on our focus monitoring, a particular school that was operating and authorized to operate as a school-wide was actually operating as a targeted assistance program and actually weren't providing to all the students within their program. So there was a population that was missing out on their eligible services. So those are the things that could possibly happen, and that's why it's important that, again, all stakeholders are involved in the conversations. Everybody's clear about which type of program, whether it's targeted assistance or school-wide, that you're operating, because it could result to findings and disallowed costs. So it's important that you distinguish between the targeted assistance program, so Title I only caseload, versus school-wide, which is all students. And if you really want to have fun, Section 1115 of ESSA talks about targeted assistance programs. I'm super close on a technical assistance guide that talks more in detail about target assistance program. Like many things, documentation has to be vetted and checked for things, and then also for accessibility as well. So I'm hopeful that that will come out shorter rather than later. Any questions on targeted assistance programs?
Not so far.
Alrighty, so Schoolwide Program. Schoolwide Program upgrades the entire educational program of that particular school. So with a Schoolwide Program, you must have a Schoolwide plan. Again, certainly could spend the rest of the day talking about what goes in that Schoolwide plan, but just kind of an overview of that Schoolwide. In Schoolwide, it serves all students and all teachers within that particular school. So all students can benefit from intervention and services. All teachers can benefit from professional development that is used within that particular school-wide plan. And again, if for fun you really want to read all about the school-wide program, section 1114 of ESSA really breaks down the school-wide program and what is allowed and not allowed. So why would school-wide program be your best bet? Maybe attractive, whatever you want to call it. It provides flexibility to allocate all available resources effectively and efficiently. So again, being able to have that flexibility, and in another aspect, it may aid in shortcomings and limited resources. So I think we've seen some different approaches with school-wide program. Certainly depending on the sources of funds that you are consolidating and pooling, which we'll talk about in a minute. I'm just going to use, for an example, Title I and Title II, and putting those two into your school-wide pot. We certainly have seen where some schools have funds and they focus more on the direct services to students, so the intervention work, those type of things. Or by pooling those two sources of funds, they may focus more on the Title II aspects, professional development and coaching. So it really comes down to school-wide, knowing the need of your school. So again, it's not an individual person's thought or decision. It's those stakeholders, the superintendent, LEA level folks, and then particularly the school, the principal, teachers, staff, and parents. The other nice thing about school-wide, a school-wide is not required to meet most of the statutory and regulatory requirements of the pooled formula federal grants, provided it meets the intent and purpose of those programs. I know Katie is going to talk a little bit in her Title IV, what happens to maybe some of the budget requirements that may go away with Title IV if you consolidate into school-wide. So I am not going to go over that. I'm going to leave that to her and her expertise. But the thing to know with the school-wide program, any of the funds that you bring in, you need to have at least one investment that meets the intents of all the original funding sources. So say, for example, you put in and consolidate Title I, II, and IV. We're looking for at least one investment for that particular school that meets the intent of those. Sometimes a particular investment can meet more than just that one funding source. Sometimes we have investments that meet all three, depending on how they're written. But if you have questions about that, just let us know. Certainly not going to get into that fine detail this morning. In addition to the school-wide program and consolidating, the funds are not proportioned, so dollar for dollar to the original funding source. And you may hear the dog in just a minute, since someone's at the door, but we'll play that by ear and see what happens. But when consolidating the funds, they're not proportional. So I'm going to try to use a simple example because it's Friday, and I'm sure simple is probably the best policy. So we're just going to stick with $100. That's what you have in your school-wide program. Certainly don't just put $100 in your school-wide pool of funds. You need a lot more than that. But we'll start with $100 and say 50 of it is 100, or excuse me, 50 of it is Title I. Oh boy, see, Friday, can't do math. $25 comes from Title II and $25 from Title IV. So it doesn't mean that you have to spend $50 on Title I initiative and 25 on Title II and 25 on Title IV. You may decide that, you know what, out of those funds being spent, I'm going to do something that's an initiative and spend $80 towards Title I and $10 for the other two remaining titles. So again, it doesn't have to be dollar for dollar. You're pooling those funds, and again, it's supposed to be the flexibility, but just remember, we're looking to make sure that you're meeting the intent of the original funding sources as well. So which funds can actually be consolidated in your school-wide pool of funds or your pot of funds? So all federal education funds, both formula and discretionary or competitive, as long as they're administered by the Department of Education. You'll see that there are some exceptions, and there are certain little causes or different requirements under different sources of funding. So IDA, Indian Education, the 21st Century Grant, Migrant, English Language, they have additional requirements. So it's not that you can just take the pot of money that you have in those funding sources and just put it in your school-wide. There are certain requirements or certain percentages that you're allowed. So it's important that if you're going to include those funds, that you know what those requirements are. And then also check with us as well. So you also can include state and local funds unless that's not allowed. So again, there's these additional requirements that may be implied depending on the actual grant source, the state and local funds. And that is where we're always going to ask you if you feel that you're going to pool anything outside of the consolidated federal program. So outside of Title I, II, and IV, reach out to us. Email us, because right now we're not still in the office, but I think we're getting some phone services soon that are capable with our computers. So just reach out to us, email us, call us if you're going to consolidate something other than 1, 2, and 4. So we can walk you through that process and what that means, and are there going to be any other impacts on the other funding sources that you're bringing in? Because we want to make sure that, yes, you have that flexibility, but we want to make sure that you're set up for success and you don't receive disallowed cost or any other additional findings, whether it's through a monitoring or an audit process. So that was a lot about school-wide. I'm guessing there's no questions.
No questions, Christine.
All right, thanks. So we'll talk about the required set-asides that come with receiving Title I Part A funds. There are 2 required set-asides that are required of the LEA, and that's homeless education and parent and family engagement. And we're going to talk about both of these in depth. So we'll start with homeless education. All LEAs that receive Title I Part A funds must reserve funds for services for students experiencing homelessness. So it is a requirement. It's in your CFP application. This afternoon, I think Karen will touch base on where that reserve must be indicated. Here in Vermont, we require that you have a reserve amount of a minimum of $500. So $500, depending on the need, may not be enough. So that's why we highly encourage you to conduct a needs assessment to determine if the reserve amount should be greater than that minimum 500. So not everybody receives the McKinney-Vento grant because that's a competitive grant, and we have limited sources of funds on that. So that is not a guarantee for anybody. So definitely encourage folks to spend their Title I funds towards these services to the students experiencing homelessness. So conduct a needs assessment. You may find, especially with COVID and the effects of COVID, that you may have a higher homeless population now to be serving those students. And you are by law, because of McKinney-Vento, to make sure that you're serving those students. So why not use those Title I funds that are eligible for those students? The reserve minimum of that 500 or more, hopefully more, must be clearly identified in the Title I budget. And again, Karen should show you that. It's in the targeting ranking section. It's clearly a line that indicates how much you're going to set aside. And then when you actually write your investments, they should be at the LEA level, and they should be within the Title I portion of the grant application. So what are some of the allowable activities using Title I funds? So the McKinney-Vento Homeless Liaison, we have many LEAs that use either Title I funds to pay for a portion of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Liaison, or maybe the full amount. Again, these are supplemental funds, so depending on your particular LEA and the funding sources and stuff like that, this may be a benefit to be able to use Title I funds. Excess transportation costs, so it has to be those transportation costs that go beyond what you would normally provide a student that was not experiencing homelessness. So again, excess costs. Folks do a great job in their grant application, making it clear that it is that excess transportation cost when you look into the actual investment in the budget lines. Supplies and materials for students that are experiencing homelessness, so clothing, maybe a winter jacket, maybe winter boots. Winter is coming, unfortunately. We probably all wish we could have a little bit more summer and a little bit of fall left, but certainly a winter coat, jacket, maybe just normal everyday clothes. I've seen where a student with experiencing homelessness, family experienced a fire in their home, and a particular LEA used their homeless set aside to purchase a couple outfits for that particular student. School supplies, backpacks, pens, paper, all those different things certainly would be allowable, and getting those to the students experiencing homelessness. Additional support services, including tutoring, counseling services, after school activities, all those different things would be allowable under Title I Part A. So again, it is a required set aside. We encourage you folks to take a look at and do a needs assessment. So if you need more than 500, maybe it's more like 5,000 or maybe even 10,000. Certainly eligible activities, there is no maximum amount. So certainly if there is a need, make sure that you're using your Title I funds to support those students. So we'll talk about parent-family engagement and that reserve. So LAs must offer programs and activities that involve parents and family members and seek meaningful consultation with parents regarding all Title I activities. Karen did talk about this a little bit in her presentation. So there is a lot of requirements with Title I and informing parents, making sure that they're involved in the activities and helping making decisions about the spending of Title I. Katie Preston, our colleague, did a great parent and family engagement presentation in the spring with a lot of great resources. That's out on the AOE website. I would encourage everybody to take a look at that at some point. Probably should take a look at it because, as Karen alluded, parent and family engagement is one of the things that it's going to be on the focus monitoring. So Amber, one of our colleagues that's on the call as well, she's going to be heading up that focus monitoring. So encouraging folks to go read those documents, ask questions, because once the focus monitoring happens, the questions, it doesn't become technical assistance at that point. It becomes more of the focus monitoring.
Christine,
yeah.
We have a question.
Sure. Thanks. I kind of needed a break. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm really echoey. I don't know what the story with that is, but the question is, do you have any suggestions for how we could do this under COVID restrictions? And I think that's referring to the PFE.
Yep. So I'm guessing it's about the parent-family engagement or the annual Title I meeting. And if that particular participant can just clarify that for Katie, because I can't see the question. But yes, it's certainly a question that has come up. So the Department of Education. Okay,
sorry.
That's okay. So parent and family engagement, the annual Title I meeting requirement that we're not necessarily touching base on today, but certainly a requirement, is still being highly encouraged by the Department of Education and education lawyers and consultants that work with the Department of Education. And it's because during COVID, having that interaction and communication with parents is just totally, it's needed. I think it's a key component to being successful and making sure that all the different components that come with COVID and remote learning and or a hybrid or whatever, interacting with parents is key. So it is still a requirement. There is no waiver on still doing parent and family engagement or the Title I annual meeting. So in the event that you're monitored or audit, you can't use the excuse that, well, COVID happened and we couldn't do it, because it's going to be a finding. An auditor is going to write you up for it. So what has been suggested is to do, if you're not doing in person, because you can't because of COVID and COVID restrictions, is to do it remotely. Whether it's a Zoom meeting, a Teams meeting. We've had a couple success stories already in the state where folks have reached out to us, and we've kind of guided them through that process of going virtual and trying to do the best that you can, and again making sure that parents are informed. You probably more than likely won't get probably the attendance that you want, but making the effort. So providing, whether it's a Zoom call or Teams, yes, you don't have the nice light refreshments to lure people in and get them to come, but trying to get them engaged about their students' academic success is still that requirement. That was probably a very long-winded answer, but happy to talk to folks more one-on-one if they have questions on that. But that is the recommendation, is to provide these meetings virtually as best as possible. Again, keeping attendance records, making note of what your agenda was, when was it provided, how was the communication, all those different things should be documented, and making the best effort as possible. So just taking a look at time here. Title I funds, or excuse me, the Parent and Family Engagement Reserve must be clearly identified in the Title I budget. Again, it sits right with the homeless set aside. There is a portion for the LEA level and school-wide, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. With Parent and Family Engagement reserve funds, please make sure that your investments are under the Title I portion. Even if you're operating a school-wide program, please make sure that whatever you're set aside for parent and family engagement at the school level is under the Title I part. It just messes up with the budget piece and the target and ranking piece of the application. So the fiscal requirements of parent and family engagement, each district with an allocation, a current allocation, does include your carryover funds of 500 or more, must reserve at least a minimum of 1% for parent and family engagement activities. And don't worry, I have an example here just in a little bit that breaks this down a little bit, so it's more simplistic rather than what does all this mean. The actual distribution of the funds, not less than 90% of the set aside must be reserved towards the school level. So of your 1%, 90% of that has to be used for school level activities, and giving the priority giving to high school, or excuse me, high need schools. So those, again, looking at your target and ranking, who has the higher need, serving them first. You certainly can take the reserve and serve all the schools with your parent and family engagement set aside. So the 10% of reserve funds, if you're just going to do 90% at the school level, can certainly be used at the LA level for oversight. For parent and family engagement requirements, maybe you have a parent and family liaison. Maybe you're going to pay teachers beyond their normal contract, so a stipend outside their normal workday to facilitate these parent and family engagement activities, certainly allowable. You're not restricted to reserve more than the 1%, so that's the minimum. You can certainly reserve more than that. Again, looking at the needs, assessing what is actually needed, would it be beneficial, all those different things. Parents and family members of children receiving Title I services should be and need to be involved in the decisions regarding how the reserve funds are allocated for parent and family engagement activities. So again, involving parents and those family members so that they know exactly what those reserve funds are going through or being used for, excuse me. So here's the example I promised you, because as you go through your budget in the CFP application, I think it's nice to have something you can refer to make sure that you meet the mark, because as your CFP application comes in, Karen's going to check to make sure that you have all those reserve amounts. And if you don't have those reserve amounts, she's going to kick that application back. So certainly an area where let's make sure that we get it right so that we don't have to do that back and forth. It saves you time and aggravation. And then obviously going through the approval process too helps speed it up. So your current allocation, for example, is $750,000. If you do the minimum of 1%, that's $7,500. Of which, again, remember that 90% of that 1% needs to be used for school level activities. So if we're only going to do the minimum of 90%, that would be $6,750, which would leave $750 to be done for LEA level activities. Certainly, it could be a decision, again, by other stakeholders that, you know what, we don't need LEA level activities. We're going to put 100% towards school level activities. And in this case, in this example, 7,500 would put at the school level activities. But again, you're not restricted from reserving more than 1%. Certainly highly encouraged if there is a need and certainly a benefit towards it. And you can reserve more than the 90% for school level activities. So what can you actually spend Title I Part A funds on when it comes to parent and family engagement? Parent and family and community engagement coordinators and liaisons. We have a few LEAs who have a full-time parent and family community engagement coordinator who is paid out of Title I. So again, it's a supplemental. If those funds went away, that position would go away. So we do have a few LEAs who have a full-time person who does all the parent engagement activities. They work on the parent and family engagement policies, the compact, some of the things that Karen touched based on her presentation, all those requirements that involve interacting and planning with all the stakeholders. But again, could be a superintendent, principals, staff, the parents in particular. Those folks can certainly be paid out of the Title I part, parent and family engagement set aside part. Supplies and materials for your actual Title I activities and the parent and family engagement meetings. This could be instructional kits, workbooks, reading and math literacy materials. A lot of our LEAs use the parent and family engagement nights to do a literacy night or a math night and provide workbooks or a book to take home so that they can engage their student when they get home. So certainly allowable. We've seen some LEAs contract out with a contractor to come in and provide guidance and activities for the parent to take home, again, to work with their student at home. So contracted services is another place that folks are spending their parent and family engagement money on. Light refreshments, and I'm going to emphasize the light refreshments part. So through Department of Education guidance, the Uniform Grants guidance, meals cannot be purchased using the federal grant funds. So light refreshments are allowable. So what is really light refreshments? And so that's come down to pizza, a light spaghetti dinner, maybe with a salad and a roll, chips, cookies, those type of things. What we don't want to see is a 3-course meal, a big buffet with 5 to 10 different options. The key is light refreshments. I have kicked back investments regarding parent and family engagement when folks write meals or a community meal. So please be advised of that. If you're going to include refreshments as part of your parent and family engagement, again, someone with COVID that may not be happening as much this year, but for future years, make sure it's light refreshments and making sure that you have the sign-in sheet to attest that you spent X amount of dollars on your pizza is certainly reasonable for the amount of people that participated. Also allowable is childcare to enable parents to attend these activities or meetings. So probably more in a non-COVID world, if you had childcare providers, again, maybe it's contracting out with a child care provider to come in, or maybe even paying your own staff. But it would certainly be allowable to make sure that those parents can participate in the parent and family engagement activities or the annual Title I Parent Night.
Christine?
Yes.
Oh, we do have a question.
Okay.
Someone wondering if they could pay parents for attending.
So absolutely not. So you can't pay parents to participate in your parent and family engagement. You can't give them gifts. So it's one of the big no-no-nos when it comes to the federal funds. So you can't pay parents to be there. You can't give them gift cards, so incentives to be there, or any kind of gifts. If that was shown through an audit process or a monitoring process, it would be automatically disallowed cost. So highly encourage whoever asked that or anybody listening to stay away from that, unfortunately. So we've talked a lot about different things. Again, this was a briefing. There are so many different aspects of the Targeted Assistance Program, the Schoolwide Program, some of the other things as far as, like Karen alluded to, comparability and some of the other insurances about Title I. So I would encourage folks to take a look at the materials that we have on the website. I'm very hopeful and optimistic about doing some future trainings, whether it's breaking down school-wide more or talking about comparability, talking about supplement, non-supplant. Those are some of the things that I'm looking forward to. I think, honestly, just like everybody, it's just a matter of time and being able to do it. But I have it on my to-do list and happy to do that. But in the meantime, folks can email me. Happy to have calls with people. I know there's a few familiar faces and well, I shouldn't say faces, but names in the participant list. And I think folks know I'm pretty reachable and approachable, and certainly try to help the field as best as possible. So if there's no questions, because I'm 2 minutes over, there's my contact information. And I think Karen's working on getting the presentations out to folks, and we'll get them also uploaded to the AOE website as well. So if there's no questions.
Nope, no other questions.
All right. Well, thanks for everybody for their time. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all the work that everybody does. We couldn't do everything that we pull off without the folks in the field. So thank you so much for your time, and thanks for all that you do and your colleagues do, and helping our students succeed. So I really appreciate that. So thank you.
All right. Thank